Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
Hi everyone, this is the Fly Culture Podcast. I often say that fly fishing is a small community, largely a very friendly one as well. But I was recently walking my dog Montana around the village where I live in Devon just the other day, and I bumped into somebody I know who walks his dog as well. And we usually talk about football, but he was wearing an Angling Trust cap, and I said, "Oh, are you into fishing?" And it turns out he was a course angler, that he enjoyed his fishing very, very much. And we subsequently kept on talking, and then he talked about his daughter's boyfriend was a very keen fly angler, and he told me that he lived in Tiverton, mentioned his name, and I said, "Oh, I recognise that name." And it so transpired that today my guest is Dylan Hooley. And some of you may well recognise that name, and we'll go into why they might know that name. But first of all, Dylan, it's great to have you along on the Fly Culture Podcast. We're doing this one face to face, and we're actually on the river right now. There's a northeasterly wind, and it's a little bit blowy. Who knows what might happen? We'll see if we can find a fish or two. But Dylan, it's great to have you along on the Fly Culture Podcast. Are you doing well?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thank you. Thank you for having me. Like you say, such a small world, and it is quite funny how we've ended up crossing paths again. But yeah, thank you for having me, and yeah, looking forward to a good day.
And Dylan, why might people know your name, and why might they recognise you? And I'll let listeners know that Dylan's 24, and I always try and shout loudly about younger anglers as well. But you've been around this fly fishing scene for quite some time. But why might people recognise your name, and why might they recognise you?
Yeah, so I was born into it. Dad was always a fisherman. And then we had the shop fly only up in Yorkshire. And then from there, I ended up tying at a few shows, so the BFFI and the Spring Fly show. So I was always the little kid that had to sit on a cushion to see over the bench, and people coming in the shop used to always watch me tie flies. And from there, it just kind of spread. I was always the little kid that was there with his parents' shop, just getting up to mischief, wandering around, pinching bits of fluff from the podiums when I could.
And time has marched on, and like I said, he's 24 now. And what age were you tying? Because it was an incredibly young age, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I first tied at a show when I was... Well, on my parents' stand, I'd tied since I was probably 7 or 8. And then I want to say that I tied at the spring show the first time when I was 8. I did that for a couple of years. And then when I was 9, I got invited out to Italy. I was very lucky to tie for a show out there. And that all came about from tying at the spring show as well. So yeah, from a very young age, I was surrounded by it.
Is fishing still a really super important part of your life?
Yes, yeah. It took a bit of a back burner for a few years while I went to uni and just got busy. But the itch has always been there. It's always been in the back of my mind. And yeah, this last season, really trying to get back into it. And yeah, spend as much time outside on the river as possible.
And what's brought you down? Because you live in Devon. It was funny because when I was talking to Stuart, he mentioned your name, and I'd seen that you bought the magazine and went back and had a look and saw that you're living in Tiverton now. What brought you down to this part of the world?
So I came down initially for uni. I did ocean science and marine conservation at Plymouth. And then from there I met my girlfriend. Through one thing and another, lockdown, I ended up living with her and her family through lockdown. And that was it, and ended up getting a job down here. And that's it, got settled down here and really like it. It's lovely having the coast nearby, Dartmoor, all the countryside. And yeah, it's such a good mix of things.
And the lovely thing is that we're standing in our waders now, we've set up our gear, and of course, if you come from a family that has a fly fishing shop, immediately my ears pricked up, and I see that Dylan has a beautiful Thomas & Thomas rod that means a lot to him. He's got a super rare Hardy reel as well that's on there at the moment, a really rare Able net as well on the back. So if you're a tackle connoisseur, you'll get where he's coming from. But what's the story of the Thomas & Thomas? You were telling me a little bit about that, and that's a lovely story too.
Yeah, so it's Thomas & Thomas and a Hardy Bouglé. And we had a customer in the shop, a good friend. His name was David. Unfortunately, he passed away, but his wife Veronica said that I should take a rod and reel from his collection. So that's what I chose. I chose the 4-weight rod and setup. And the rest of his tackle we sold through the shop, and the money went to the hospice care. So yeah, it's nice to fish with some of his tackle. It's got a lot of sentiment to it, and it's just nice to keep that alive.
And in the car on the way down, we were talking about, you were saying you were fishing the Ure with your dad and brother and Martin, actually, from Guide Fly Fishing. And how have you found the comparison of the fishing from what you're used to in Yorkshire comparable to the West Country? Is there comparisons, or is it completely different? How do you find it?
There's definitely comparisons. The rivers that I was used to back home was the River Home and parts of the River Combe, which were very industrialised. So you're fishing through shopping trolleys and bikes and other things that have been thrown in. But these rivers are a lot more like the Ure, a little bit bigger, a little bit slower in parts. Yeah, some lovely fish in them as well. But then up on Dartmoor, those streams are completely unlike anything I've fished. Very clear, very fast, pocket water. And yeah, just lovely to be out.
It's a real mix of stuff, and it was interesting what you said about some of the slower bits. And we're sort of fishing middle tour, really, and the pool we're standing on is a long, slower one. And I guess it's less, the term freestone doesn't really apply in quite the same way as you might, we got deeper pools. And I'm guessing, and I this isn't said with huge knowledge, but I would think the rivers here are probably more acidic than what you encounter at home. And as a result, I could be wrong, our sea trout runs are probably slightly greater than you would get in Yorkshire. Do you think that's a fair comment, or is it something different again?
It's not something I know too much about, to be honest. I know the Ure is starting to have a bigger run of sea trout and salmon. So I dare say that there is a bigger run down here, but I wouldn't be able to say why, I don't think.
We're recording this at the very end of May. There is the outside chance of a mayfly hatch. I was here, it's Tuesday today after the bank holiday. I was here on Saturday and I was briefly attached to something that was eating mayfly. The problem, as I said in the introduction, is that we've got these sort of northerly, easterly winds coming in at the moment, and the pool we're in at the moment is relatively sheltered. There are midges on the water at the moment. I've been keeping half an eye while I've been thrusting a microphone into Dylan's face at the moment. I've not seen anyone rise. Have you seen signs of anything?
Nothing rising, no. I've seen a few mays just on the far bank slowly appearing, but no fish moving at the moment.
Cool. And I've not fished with Dylan before. So how do you like to fish? What's a perfect day for you? Do you like to prospect the water? Do you like to find rising fish, or a combination there? What's a perfect day for you?
Generally, to start with, I'd like to watch, whether it's 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, just as long as you feel's needed. From there, you can get a bit of a feel and see if fish are moving and what approach you want to take. If possible, I'd always go for a dry fly first, just because there's that visual aspect of it. But it just depends on what you feel like on the day. I wouldn't say I have one particular style that I enjoy more than others. There's definitely some that work better than others, but it's neither here nor there, really.
And that makes a lot of sense, just sort of setting up for the conditions, and that makes perfect sense. As I said, you may detect a little bit of wind in the background. The mic might be picking that up. But as I said, we do have some shelter, and where I'm expecting the fish to be looks relatively sheltered. There's a little bit of ripple. So we've sort of been watching here a little bit. What we'll do is probably take a walk upstream just a tiny bit, just to see if anyone's home. It's only 10 o'clock now, so it's early. The hatch of May, certainly I would be expecting to be more around lunchtime at the moment. So it allows us to sort of catch up, talk a little bit. I can show Dylan the water as well and see what's going on. So, yeah, we might just have a little walk upstream and see what's happening. So we've only walked about 7 or 8 paces upstream, and there's some flat water on the far side. And Devon fish don't really sort of continually rise. You don't see it in quite the same way as I've seen it on many rivers. Yet we've seen a fish that has probably risen at least half a dozen times. Really, really subtle. What are you making of what you've seen so far, Dylan?
I wouldn't say it's breaking the surface much. I'm going to take a bit of a guess that things are just hatching and it's sucking them from just under the surface film. It's a very, very gentle rise, but there is a rhythm to it. It's quite happily feeding over there. It's just as the water sort of shallows up and you can start to make out the bottom again. So it'll be maybe a couple of foot deep.
Yes, it is. The bank there, it drops away. It's quite steep on that far side, and there's sort of a lip, and I know there's a lip there because I've lost so many bloody salmon flies there, that and it's sort of just by that sort of edge there. And funnily enough, since I've put this on, I've not seen. Have you seen him rise while we've been talking? Once. So he's still going. Putting this into context, it's quite a difficult cast as well. The wind's blowing downstream quite aggressively at the moment. To get into position is going to be difficult because it's a relatively deep pool, and you've got to try and get out as far as you possibly can. And probably the best approach is as opposite as you can get to the fish without spooking it. But you've also got an oak tree hanging down our side of the river that wants to grab your fly. So it's it may on paper, or it may as you're listening, sound a relatively easy cast. It's anything but that. So it's going to be a fascinating battle, I think, that's going to open up. What are you tying on, Dylan?
I'm probably going to go with a little CDC emerger, maybe a 16 or even an 18. There's a few small midges just gliding around, but I don't think there's any maize in big numbers yet to be worth putting anything bigger on. So that's what I'm going to go with. Go small to start with.
Excellent. Well, let's see how this one plays out. We saw a splashy rise from a fish downstream, but this one, like Dylan was saying, it's so subtle. It seems relatively happy. I would say, if anything, the rhythm is slow. Oh no, it's just risen this second. And there's sort of a tree there's a branch overhanging the pool. There's probably, and where he is, there's probably a branch coming out, I think, about 3 or so feet above the water. So it's going to be an interesting one to try and land the fly in there. There's sort of a kind of a small bay there. That's how I'd probably best describe it. But it's going to be quite a challenge to see if he can get to this one. Dylan slowly walked his way out, and I think he's probably discovered how deep this actually is. The fish is still rising. So I've just seen it rise this second, but it is with that wind you can see actually. Now he's landed a cast pretty much. Oh, I thought that was very close. That looked very close to where the fish was. Like you said, he's got a small CDC emerger on there, and the cast isn't an easy one. You really got to land it. He's a nice caster. And yeah, he's just a little bit short. It's just risen. Tiny. The fish, if anything, I would say, is shifting around a little bit. That would be how it looks. It's not sort of in one place. So it will have a look at something, but it's in a very flat piece of water. And of course, when that water's not, a lot of the river here is ruffled by the wind at the moment, but that's a nice flat bit. And if you're a bug trying to hatch, it's much harder to actually hatch through unbroken water like that. The surface tension will be much harder to work with. So he's casting a little bit further upstream now. I think he's almost in the ballpark there. It's almost there, but like we say, it's just such a tricky cast. Just rested the fish. That's a good way to go about things as well. That it just rested that fish for a few moments, and we just checked to see if it was still going to rise. and it's just risen again. And actually, there is, when that wind eases a little bit as well, I think there's a correlation there somewhere in the line. But it's just risen again, actually, as well. So it looks to me as though he's right on him as well. So it could be... I wonder if that wind's just taking that fly a little bit further behind the fish as well. Now he's risen again as well. So yeah, this is a real rarity. I'm excited because seeing a fish rising so regularly and so happily, and that speaks testament to his presentation, that he's not spooked the fish in any way, shape or form as well. So that's encouraging from that point of view. The dog's in position, watching things closely as well at the moment. So we'll see how that again looks right on the money. Well, that was kind of exciting. Do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, so I think I spooked the fish a little bit the first time I fished through it. My first few casts weren't great. Then rested it just for a couple of minutes, and the fish came back. And then as soon as I really fired my fly right up against the far bank, it did come up and took the fly, but I just missed it. I had quite a lot of line out, so I think I wasn't quite in control. But it was great to see.
I think also it looked like, because I've watched the cast before, and you could see how drag was probably coming in. You could sort of detect how the fly speeded up a little bit, and you remedied that immediately by going in a little bit further. And it looked to me, I don't know, I think to me it looked as though the fish had turned on it and eaten it that way. Do you think that?
Yeah, definitely. I saw it big flanks, and I felt the fish. I just didn't have the line control for it. But yeah, great to see.
And we stepped up probably 10-15 paces more, and I've seen a fish go not quite as regular as that one. That was just a beauty to see him just suddenly, rise and rise and rise and rise. This one I've seen rise twice, and another one we've seen probably 10 feet up from there as well. So it looks like there might be something on. It looks as though the emerger pattern is the right one to have on at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see if we get lucky again. So this has been interesting. Dylan very kindly offered me a shot at a fish we'd seen rising. And I sort of said to him, it seems as though he's stopped now. And, I made a big thing about the fish previously rising relatively regularly, and we'd seen it go 2 or 3 times, and then that was it. May have been me stepping out there. And there was a fish downstream that I'd also seen rise, and in between the two, somebody came and ate the fly, and I sat on it and felt the fish on very briefly, and then it came up. Do we learn anything from this? Are the fish just sort of not biting it hard? Is it us? Is it drift? What are you seeing from what you've seen so far? Are you taking anything from this?
Hard to tell so far. They're definitely there. There was one right up under the bank just then. So I don't know if they're just starting to come on a little bit more, and they're still a little bit wary. We've both felt the fish. I saw your rod bend into that one. So maybe they're just lacking that little bit of confidence to take properly.
And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? We often sort of kind of blame ourselves for a fish not eating it. But it looked as though in both cases everything had gone to plan, and that's an interesting point you made about the confidence in the rise, and perhaps that was an aspect of why it didn't bite it quite as hard. The fish came from nowhere. I let him eat it, lifted into it, and like Dylan said, that the rod bent a little bit for a short time. So that part of the deal, I think I'd feel, but perhaps it just didn't bite it as well as I'd hoped, or it didn't bite it as well as it wanted to either.
Yeah, that'd be my guess. If in doubt, blame the fish.
We'll do that. We're going to fish together, I can see that. Right, we're going to have a watch here for a few more minutes. See, as I said, there are a couple of others going. If they do rise again, then Dylan's up. We're both fishing emerger patterns. Mine's My friend Warren tied for me. There he goes. The one by the rocks now has just gone that Dylan mentioned. So I guess you're up, buddy. One of the things I forgot to say today was, for the first time in a long time, I'm fishing a graphite rod. And it's one of Luke's CTS blanks. It's a 9.5 foot 4 weight. And it's kind of fun to fish one. I thought to myself, I've not fished a graphite rod for so long, for trout certainly, that I thought I'd give it a go today. And it's strange casting something a little bit different, but it's been fun too. And really enjoying it so far. But we've seen a fish, the fish by the rocks that Dylan mentioned, has risen. They're not as regular, and we've not seen it for a little while, but he's wading out into position now to go and have a cast at this fish, see if he can bring it up. The wind again has picked up, so my gut is that it will probably not rise for a little bit. But the other thing to bear in mind if you're a river angler and it's blowing a little bit is terrestrials, of course. If you're thinking that, well, this might be the pattern, it doesn't work, things like that you can think about a little bit that make you change your fly pattern, and it may pay off too. But Dylan's stuck with the emerger for the time being. I'm sticking with this one only purely because we both brought fish up and hooked fish that way. But yeah, those little things, sometimes I always try and think that the river gives you a little bit of a clue. And yeah, that wind may give a little bit of a clue as to, perhaps my next fly selection. I've seen one mayfly skitter across the surface, but that's been it so far. Midge seems to be the main thing on the water just at the moment. One of the things you notice when you watch somebody fish is how confident they are with the fly rod in their hand. I was just watching how he dried his fly, put it into position and cast it out right into the spot. And yeah, you can just tell somebody and see somebody who's grown up with a fly rod in their hand. So we talked about Dylan's pedigree as a fly tyer, and I just wondered, are you somebody who likes to tie a lot of flies in wintertime, thinking about fishing in the summertime? Do you tie as you need them? How do you go about your tying? Is it filling gaps in the fly box, or you think of a pattern that you'd like to try? How does that work for you?
Tying for myself, I wouldn't say I tie much through the winter in preparation. I tend to more fill up a few small gaps, things that you can trust and you have confidence in, little pheasant tails and things like that. But then as the season goes on, I'll go out and I'll think, oh, I need that next time, and I'll tie something when I get back, and I'll prepare more trip on trip rather than season to season. And that means then you can travel a little bit lighter as well. You don't have to think, I'll bring everything just in case I need it. You can think, I'll need this next time, so I'll tie up 3 or 4 of those. And it keeps everything as light as possible.
And it's a question I ask many people a lot of the time, and it seems to be a stock answer. And judging by your vest, I can see the answer to that. But do you carry a lot of flies?
No, I've got 1 box at the minute. Well, 2. I've got one sort of standard box and one that's got compartments instead of slits for bigger dries, so they don't get crushed as much. But that's as heavy as ever I travel. It's much easier just to have what you need and be a lot more mobile on the water rather than stuck in one place.
Absolutely. And we've walked downstream a little ways and we're waiting to see if a fish is going to rise. We fished a spot I call Honey Hole 2, which isn't really a dry fly water. It's a small little pot that has a run in and then a run out, and it comes at a very slight angle, and it lends itself perfectly to either a duo setup, or we fished it with a nymph under a New Zealand yarn indicator. And that was kind of fun. It's a little pot, and we had a couple of fish out there that was kind of cool. So it's nice to catch, I guess, a fish on a new river for you.
Yes, definitely. Stunning little fish as well. Really well fed. Proper rugby ball shape. And yeah, as always with little brownies, very, very pretty. Very pretty.
So what we're doing is waiting to see in a spot, see if we can see some fish rise. We're at the bottom and we'll probably only fish this now. We may come back down and have a look you sometimes feel that there's some unfinished business, but there's some other pools that are probably going to be waiting for us as well. So we'll wait and see how those play out. The sun's out, and we've seen the odd mayfly skitter down the pool, not many. There isn't a heavy hatch, and when I've been down recently, there's been sort of hatches have felt as though they've been backed up a little bit. So it's almost like the conductor has hit the baton, and everything's decided it wants to hatch. Whereas today it seems as though we'll be able to identify, I think, more easily what the fish are feeding on. And, it's been predominantly midges. I've seen some olive uprights, as I said, the odd mayfly. Have you spotted anything else?
A couple of little yellow mays, but that's about it. Like I say, a lot of midges, and I'm sure there'll be other things mixed in and amongst. That's about it.
And that's an interesting point you say about the yellow mays. Down here, I've certainly on the bit of river I fish and the Tor generally, I've not really seen them hit yellow mays and eat them. But I think, would I be right in thinking that they're part of the diet up on some of the rivers you fish up in Yorkshire?
I'd guess so, yeah. It's typical that we never really get out during mayfly time back home, but because it was busy in the shop. So you spend all day dealing with people, and then you get a bit of free time, and it's the last thing you want to think about when you're surrounded by it all week. But yeah, definitely, it was always one that we'd hear about, without a doubt.
Yeah, and Dylan's just spotted another mayfly taking to the air, so that one has made it as well. And it is what you say there is really interesting, and I know from a guiding perspective, when you're working in the industry, it can be seen as a dream job, and in many respects it is, but sometimes it's really nice to step away from it. And I always worry sometimes that your life, and I know when I make Freudian slips and say when I should be saying shopping or whatever, I say fishing, but it can be good to step away from it every now and again when you're so deeply immersed in it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. You get suffocated by it. It's everywhere, and it's all you think about. You wake up and you see it, and it's the last thing you see before you go to bed. So it is definitely nice to have that away time, and it makes you appreciate it more when you come back to it.
And does that mean for you now, working in a different job as such, that, and I know from your social media and stuff like that you're getting out and enjoying fishing the rivers, are you seeing it in a different way?
Yes, definitely. Fishing's become a break rather than a job. So it's definitely nice to have that break from work and completely unwind, rather than fishing as well as the job. And then you lose the spark for it after a while.
I definitely know what you mean. And, when I was extremely busy with it, you sometimes look back on a season and think, I barely fished. And that's another year that rolls on. And the years seem to roll on rather quickly these days. And so I try and make the most of every session that I have on the river. It may be a short one, it may be a long one. Today will be we'll fish later into the afternoon. But yes, it is. There are some more mayflies coming down the river on the far bank now as well. So it'll be fascinating to see. The section here actually is pretty open. It's wide, it's flatter, it's slower. So I guess this may be better a little bit later as the sun swings round. But yes, it is those moments. Many of us use fishing as an escape from every day, but you can almost over immerse yourself in it and not fall out of love with it. I've had situations where I've had to step away from it for a little while. Have you ever come to those as well?
Yes, definitely. So growing up, I was in the shop every day. I'd come back from school and I'd be in the shop. On the weekends, I was either in the shop or working at the fishery that we had at the time. And it soon becomes too much. So from sort of 17 up until recently, up until the last couple of months, I took a long break from it in the amount that I was doing. I went to uni and focused on that. And like I say, it's only been these last couple of months where I've really had the itch to get back out and enjoy it again. I always enjoyed it, but not to this degree.
Yeah, it's been lovely watching you fish. And one of the things I've noticed, you're great company because, you like to fish one on, one off. If we get lucky to have a fish, you take as much pleasure in someone else fishing, that aspect of it as well. But the excitement of seeing a pool, seeing fish rise, you're pointing stuff out, and it's sometimes a change of scenery is good as well, and refreshes and allows you to reset a little bit as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Everywhere's different. So this is a completely new river for me. There's similarities between other places I've fished, but it is a completely new situation, new environment. So it's lovely to be somewhere new and learn new things.
Yeah, absolutely. And each section of this is completely different. But like I said, we've been focusing on that flatter water. Dylan shares a passion for wanting to cast at a fish that he sees rise as well. So it's kind of nice to be able to share that as well with him. So I don't know. I think we've sat and waited for a little bit. It doesn't look like anyone's moving just at the moment. Do you think should we have a little walk upstream, see what's going on up there?
Yeah, definitely. We'll rest this bit. Maybe come back later, maybe not, see what it's like. But yeah, I think the fish here have just put their heads down a little bit.
Now, we were about to move, and Dylan said, blimey, look, there's a flounder. And we're quite some way from the sea. I know that I've seen them further up the river too, but he saw one move, it's probably half a pound, something like that, tied on a nymph, flipped at it, and what happened?
Yeah, I lost sight of the nymph. But I was just sort of slowly watching my line, keeping my eye on the fish, and I just saw the slightest little move of its mouth, lifted into it, and yeah, here it is.
That is absolutely extraordinary. We're going to get some photos of that. That is a first for the Fly Culture podcast. We've got wild carp on the fly. We've caught pike on the fly, but certainly it's a first for the Fly Culture podcast that we've had a flounder on the fly. Dylan, great skill. Nicely done, my friend.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
We're in some faster water, and we suggested why not throw a duo on and see what happened. And that was kind of nice fish, wasn't it?
Yes, very, very. I've just bumped 2 fish already in here. So I was thinking, a couple more casts, it'll be fish through. And yeah, big fish, such little water.
Yeah, it's about £1.25. I weighed it in the weigh net, about £1.25, which is nice. We'd seen the rise sort of, there's some fish around that are half having a look, and again, I'm sure I'm probably trying to make an excuse for those fish not sticking this morning, but it sort of sums up how they are about the dry. I got lucky downstream and saw one rise, thought, well, it's not going to eat, and was wound in, and then thought, right, okay, let's go again, and managed to catch it. It was a fish of 9-10 inches, something like that, which I'm really thrilled with. It's just after lunchtime now. The sun's out, the sun's moving round. We're back close to where we started, and we're going to have a look to see if anyone's about. The interesting thing for me is that I can't see any mayflies about. Whether that intensifies, or we'd seen some earlier downstream, and it's only a short distance, probably 200 yards downstream, possibly a little bit more. But where we are right now, I haven't seen signs of them at the moment. But like I was saying that, actually there's one on the far side, I think I can see. I was saying how comfortable Dylan is with a fly rod, and you were telling me a story about what you used to do when you used to come home from school, and perhaps you'd like to share that with us.
Yeah, so it was when we had the old shop in Brockholes, the industrial estate had the River Home running through the back of it. And I'd get home from school and run into the woods and pull off a willow branch, pull off any leaves and crap attached to it, tie up a couple of flies in the shop, and then wrap it all together with some normally 18-pound Maxima that we had kicking about. And I'd go down to the river and use that to catch fish. And it was just good fun, using nothing but a stick and line and a couple of flies I'd really quickly tied up and couldn't wait to get on the river after school.
And do you think that is really for the argument that sometimes we overcomplicate things, and sometimes just simple works incredibly well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a science. People try and make it into one, and there's a lot of variables, but the fish still eats what the fish eats. As long as it's in front of them, they're going to have a look at it.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, I've not seen anyone rising just upstream of us. As I said, I've seen a couple of mayfly just in front of us, but we're going to have a walk up, and perhaps we'll go and have a look at the upper section of the river, see who's home there, see if anything's going on. I've not fished this very top of the beat this year, The wind is still blowing. It would be nice if that drops, and I'm sure later, once we've gone, it probably will do, and that may be a time. But we've seen some rising fish today. We caught some fish, so we're perfectly happy about that. But it's always one of those things, again, when you're on your home water and you've got a guest for the day, you want to show them as much as you can of it. So, yeah, we're going to have a wander upstream. We're only a short distance upstream, but we've seen 2 fish actually eat mayfly, which is kind of exciting. So Dylan's snipped his nymph off, and he's got I think it's a detached body mayfly that he'd tied on. He's moved into position and is about to make his first cast. That's just about on the money. He's twitched the fly a little bit, and I thought he'd get whacked on that one. I'm very, very surprised he didn't. I thought you'd get whacked then. And that was a bit of a surprise. There's another one a little bit further up who's in a harder to reach position. But I'm surprised. Yeah, that's a lovely cast again. It's quite a long cast, and the wind is coming into play a little bit. And also where the fish are actually feeding is in slack water off of the main flow. Now, the flow here is running pretty much down the middle of the river. It's not a strong flow. It's a slowish glide. This one's right on the money there. Let's see if somebody's going to eat that one. I'm very, very surprised that's not whacked either, because they seemed keen to feed. I'm surprised at that. So Dylan fished another run with a nymph and had a nice fish by the looks of it. Your rod looked bent over.
Yeah, it was quite a nice fish. 3/4 of a pound, but in that current, it gave a good fight of itself.
And we've been fishing this way. We've sort of come to the conclusion. We've seen some rising fish. We've been throwing at them, and it still feels as though the fish aren't biting it confidently. Would you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, they're still sort of playing with the flies rather than confident takes. Don't know whether it's early in the season, early in the day, and they'll come on more this evening as the light drops, or just one of those things.
And you've been fishing, I noticed with your dry flies that you're fishing with dillywax. Is there any reason that you fish with that, or was it just so happened that was what was in your fishing vest?
It's just what was in my pocket. There's no reason to that.
Yeah, you like it. And I've been fishing with Dry Fly Magic still. I like that a great deal. Any tips? I was watching you apply it to your dry fly. How do you like to apply your floating to the dry fly? Any technique that you use?
I tend not to put it directly on the fly. I find that can gunk up the fly a little bit, and it's easy to put too much on. So I put a little bit on the back of my hand and then just rub my fly in that, and it just gives you a bit more control. It means you don't get it on your line as well. So it's just a little bit more control over it.
That's a nice tip, and yeah, it might be one worth considering. I've noticed as well that with the Dry Fly Magic more recently as well, I've been rubbing it a little bit more vigorous. I use my thumb and forefinger a little bit more vigorously, and it seems to give me a little bit more floatability of the fly as a result of that. I don't know how much you work that before when you put it onto the back of your hand. Are you working that a fair bit, or just putting it on and applying it straight away?
A little bit. I'd say the heat from my hand helps melt the product a little bit before it goes onto my fly, so it leaves a residue rather than a paste, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and with CDC as well, that's pretty cool as well, isn't it? That it's not gonna, those fibres, because it's the fibres really that are making that fly float, not oil really as such, is it? It's the fibres. So yeah, if you're a bit heavy with those fibres, then that fly's not going to float as well either, is it?
No, definitely. It's more there to enhance what you've already got rather than give the fly a new life. I feel like once the fly's sunk and it's got waterlogged, I change it anyway. I feel like there's no bringing it back without letting it dry completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we walk back downstream again. We're looking to see where we'd seen some risers previously. We're having a look there just to see the mayfly hatches. Said it felt as though there was a little spurt of mayflies, wasn't it, hatching? And it's coming in small pulses, I think, is probably the best description, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You'll see them for 5-10 minutes and then they'll just sink away a little bit again.
And it's not really, as I said, we've had fish come and look at the dry, but they've not bitten it aggressively. I had somebody sort of come and slap the fly rather than, yes, I'm going to eat you. And I know when they're locked onto them, the takes tend to be a lot more different, a lot more confident. And even this morning with just CDC emerger flies, it was a similar sort of story. So it may still have that early season feel to it. I think it's noteworthy of what Dylan said, perhaps a little bit later. But generally over the years, I've not had too many issues with the fish during the day when they're on. They'll eat it if they're rising. But it still has that very, despite us being at the end of May, that early season feel given everything the fish have had to contend with, and that may be why they're not perhaps eating it with the confidence that we can sometimes hope they would at this time of year. So Dylan, I'm fascinated to know, and it's a question I often ask guests, to get a sense of fly fishing. How does the fly fishing landscape look to you right now?
Good and bad. There's promising signs when you look elsewhere. You look at Scandinavia and America, and I feel like their industry is doing really well. This country seems to get left behind a little bit. I'm not sure what it is, whether we're very traditional compared to them. But there is signs of it breaking through. Look at streamer fishing and how that's taken off. So the mindset's starting to change, and we're getting a new approach, which is nice to see.
Absolutely. And, as a younger person who's more tuned into social media, I was interested to hear you say that you had a bout of COVID and that made you want to go on to Instagram and open up an Instagram account. Was that a conscious decision to sort of stay away from it? You weren't particularly bothered by it, and so you just sort of decided, right, I might share some of my fishing stuff? Or was that coincidental, or planned, I should say, I guess really, with how you were looking at fly fishing again?
A bit of both. I used to have a Facebook account a long time ago now, but I fell out with Facebook a little bit because of the experts, quote unquote, who'd give their opinion as fact when no one's really right or wrong. There was a lot of armchair experts, and it just got a bit of a toxic place to be. So I took a break from all of that. Whereas Instagram, I don't know whether it's just sort of the demographic that uses it, and there's always a picture to go with things. You get a little bit more of a story and a reason rather than just a quote and someone's opinion.
And so have you enjoyed your return to it with the pictures I know you've been putting pictures up of the flies you've been tying, and you've been fishing the X a little bit as well. Has that been fun to do?
Yes, definitely. It's given me more motivation to go out, because I feel like if I go, I can get a picture and I can, I might not catch anything, but I can say it's better than being at work. So it's given me more of a fire to get out and do things.
Yeah, and it's a nice, I suppose it's a new backyard for you as well, really, in some respects, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. We moved to Tiverton last summer, after living through lockdown I lived up in North Devon with my girlfriend and her family. Then we moved to Exeter last year, and then Tiverton this year. So yeah, it's definitely very new, very fresh. And the X is somewhere I hadn't fished at all until just the other week.
Nice. And yeah, if people want to enjoy your images and everything else, how do they find you on Instagram?
So yeah, it's just an Instagram account. I don't have anything else. And I believe it's Dylan Hooley _fishing. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I think that's about right.
Perfect. Well, go check those out. And, like Dylan's been saying, you probably listened and heard today how much sense he talks. It's a pleasure watching him wield a fly rod as well. And I was watching him just as we were moving pool sort of dry the fly off with a false cast and then go into a spey cast. Not showing off, it was just skill, and it was just lovely to see that. And I really enjoyed seeing that, particularly as he was using my rod at the time as well. So it's nice to see it being operated expertly, which is really, really cool. We've walked upstream. We're going to have one last go. You may have heard the wind in the background. We've seen the maize, a few coming off. There's not a great deal else about at the moment, actually, is there?
Not particularly. There's a few midges sort of drifting around and the very odd caddis. But no, that's about it as far as things go.
So what do you reckon? Shall we give it one last go here, see if anyone's rising, and then say, tip our caps, we've done okay, we caught a couple of fish, and it's been a great day. Should we just give it one last go, though?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just packing up now, and just feels like it's died off a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. The last half an hour, the insects have been very hit and miss, and obviously the trout have followed those.
Yeah, and I know you've done some dark art stuff as well with a little bit of nymph, which worked, and even throwing a streamer through, and there hasn't been a keenness there either, really, which you'd expect. You got whacked by a fish, I think, didn't you?
I had one fish on. I don't think it was much bigger than the fly I was using. But yeah, nothing really interesting in that either.
And my observations, I saw a couple of fish rise to maize, and the observations I seem to make from this is that, I like to move that fly a little bit when they're on them, and they'll chase it down, and the fly has to go right over them, and they're not eating it again confidently. They're sort of slapping at it. And I had a fish rise, and I thought, oh, here we go. And I put on a great big French partridge and threw it out over it. It slapped at it. I gave him the chance to eat it, lifted, there was nothing there. And it was almost like he didn't even get close to it because he rose again. I changed the fly and then went once more, and then had no interest in what I was throwing at him. And it seems as though they're sort of kind of looking the nicer fish, and we've had some nice fish today, but it seems as though the nicer ones that I get lucky with every now and again down here don't seem to be playing yet. And it seems as though the smaller fish are having a look. The flies in some cases may be a little bit big for them, so they're not they're almost having to drown it, I think, to eat it. So I think there's an element of that, but they're not doing that as cleanly. And sometimes if that happens, they give it a whack with the tail and follow it round. I've not foul hooked any. Not that I've had many eat a mayfly, but even when we started the day, the fish that we caught weren't eating those smaller CDC emergers as cleanly as I would have hoped in nice, easy pace water. So perhaps that tells us a little bit that the fish still aren't fully used to feeding at the surface here just yet. I don't think it's far off, so I'll be watching with great interest. But Dylan, I thoroughly enjoyed fishing with you today. You've been great company, knowledgeable, interesting to chat with as well. Thank you for coming along today. I've really enjoyed having you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure. I've loved fishing somewhere new, and yeah, the company's been very good.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you.
Everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying these as much as me. And it's lovely to give you a sense of what's been happening on my home water. I hope the fish are a little bit better locked on where you're fishing right now, but it's part of why I love this so much and figuring it out. And hopefully there's been some little hints and tips. As I said, for me, that movement of the fly that I've talked about on previous podcasts isn't working right now as it does with the mayflies here. So that's given me a big clue. And it may be, like I've said before, the next few days, fish get a little bit more confident with them. But you can be guaranteed that I'll be down here very, very soon.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.